Funny enough, I don't want to be very theological. I want to discuss high theology. I always believe that sanctuary should be somewhere where people just go and discuss the faith in a very casual, simple, and faith-sharing manner. And that's how I prepared to talk about this evening. I don't want to sound theology, quote so many texts of the Bible or quote church documents, or sound like a theologian trying to load it over everybody, but I'll just try to discuss it as very common reality of our lives. Luckily for me, I think the question is part of sociology. You know, as sociologists, we study gender, socialization of gender, or gender, social construction of gender in the society. And you know, most of our societies are socially constructed. That's how the housing system, the gender roles are assigned. I mean, if I was carrying a baby here who was dressed in pink, and I asked you what sex is the child, all of you would say it's a female child. And if I was carrying a baby dressed in blue, and I asked what's the sex of the child, everybody would just automatically presume it's a male child. So that's how our society is socially constructed. That's how gender is socially constructed. And these construction theories are beginning to dive into the church. They're beginning to touch the very essence of the church, the understanding of religion, the place of religion, and even the concept God. You know, very, very often there are people who tell you that God is not a father, though, because God has no gender or things like that. And this argument, they look simple, but they can affect so many people's faith. And so when I saw this topic raised up, why are priests mainly men, or why the priesthood is predominantly male dominated, I said, okay, we'll just talk about it, and I'll just talk about it as a very casual, simple discussion. And to begin with, I want us to understand what the priesthood is all about. Priests are not just reserved to the Catholic Church or to Christianity. We have priests in traditional African society. We have priests in Hindu. We have priests in Buddhism. We have priests in even in other traditional religions, Asian religions. A lot of them have priests. We have priests. So priesthood is not something common to the Catholic Church or to Christianity alone, or Judaism. All the three major religions of the world have priests, and a priest is always seen as a religious figure, a person who represents a deity, who acts on behalf of a deity, the human presence, the human symbol, or the human sign of the divine reality that is not physically seen. And the priesthood, one unique thing about the priesthood of Christ is that the priesthood of Christ is a bit different from all the priesthood you can talk about, because it is only in Jesus that the priesthood brings in two essential elements of the priest. A priest is always somebody who offers prayer for and on behalf, and he always use what we call a victim. There can be no priesthood without a victim. And so if you go to every religion, a priest must offer something. And the victim could be an animal, could be food, could be libation, could be liquid, wine, alcohol. So there's always the priest who is the agent, and then there's always a victim who becomes the scapegoat of the intentions of the person praying, or the intentions of the person who wants to offer prayers to the deity or to the religious figure. But when it comes to Jesus Christ had a priesthood that was a bit unique. And the uniqueness of the priesthood of Jesus Christ was that he brought in the victim and the agent together. The victim became the agent, and the agent was the victim. And that's why the priesthood of Jesus Christ is a bit different. If you look at the priesthood of the Jews, starting from the Levitical clan, the priest was chosen to act on behalf of the people, but the priest was always different from the victim. In other words, the priest would be a human being, while the victim would be an animal, which we have the scapegoat. That's where the theology of the English word scapegoat came from. And the scapegoat means annually the Jews brought in a goat. I know that's where archaeologists are beginning to believe that mountain goats may have evolved from the scapegoat of religious worship, where a goat was taken and then taken out of the city and then held, and the people came, and on top of the goat, they mentioned their sins. And after they did that, the goat was released into the wild. And the goat was not expected to come back, and people never hunted such goats. They were called scapegoat. And that's why scapegoating became a reality, where somebody is always a victim of other people's mistake. But when it comes to Jesus, Jesus did not just act as a priest, but he also acted as the victim. And that's why the priesthood of Christ is a bit different. Jesus, on the other hand, too, he was not a respecter of culture. He didn't respect culture. If you read about his life as a human being in Israel, one, he went to the temple and sat among elders to teach. And so he didn't believe that knowledge was reserved for the elderly people. He didn't respect that culture of elderly wisdom reserved for the elders. Two, he asked a Samaritan woman to give him water to drink, an act that Samaritans and Jews never shared anything in common, even as little as water. He asked the Samaritan woman to give him water to drink. Three, Jesus was a Nazarite. He was not supposed to touch a dead body. He kept touching dead people to raise them back to life. Four, Jesus was a Nazarite. He was a prophet. He was a minister. And a prophet, they were known not to identify with sinners. But he did. He identified with sinners. He ate with them. And this is one of the things that the Pharisees accused him of. More importantly, Jesus was accused of gluttony. He was called, in the Gospel of Mark, he was called a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors. So these are all indicators that Jesus did not observe the social construction of gender, where gender roles were assigned to people based on cultural beliefs, based on mythological background. He didn't observe that. He didn't follow those rituals. He didn't follow that tendency of the society. And so whatever Jesus did, he was very unique. He did it his own way, that this is what should be done, and this is what he understood reality to be. But when it came to choosing his disciples, the Bible tells us that there were 72. The Gospel of Mark, they tell us that there were 72 people who were praying, and Jesus came. And out of these 72, there were women. His disciples were not only men, his disciples were women. And of these disciples, he chose 12, whom he named apostles. And at the time he was choosing these 12, the Gospel of Mark also tells us that there were other women who provided for him. There were other women who assisted him with material needs, with food, provisions, and things like that. But he never picked from among these women any to be an apostle. He chose just 12. And out of these 12, the tradition continued that even the early apostles never deviated from this tradition of picking just 12 men. The question would be, why did they follow that? We may go back to the idea of victimhood. If you look at, even in the modern age, this sign has always stood for peace. And historically, they said this sign comes from the background that in the ancient world, when wars were fought, this was a sign of a woman. And this stands for a woman because of the two ovaries, and then from the two ovaries comes down, where she gives birth. And so this sign was a sign when soldiers saw a person at a distance and they raised the two fingers, they were saying it is a woman, you don't need to attack her, because women were not supposed to be killed. And so this was mean peace, don't fight, don't attack. It's a woman, you don't need to attack her. And that's how that sign gradually became a sign of peace, that today we sign around the world and we show as a sign of peace. And so a victim entails sacrifice. And so Jesus felt that he was going to call men who were also going to be victims, in the sense that they were going to face a war, they could be killed, they could be sacrificed, they could be victims themselves. And that is why even as a priest, when you offer the sacrifice of the Mass, the priest is always expected to consume the host he consecrates at Mass. Because as a priest, there is always a victim element of your own sacrifice. And so sometimes when people ask you, Father, why are you not married? I say, well, a priest is a victim. And to be a victim, there must be an element of sacrifice. And so when they say the priesthood of the Catholic Church, one great example of that victimhood is to sacrifice the family life, to sacrifice close bond, something that that is involving your blood, because your own blood becomes a libation. And so Jesus did not follow the protocols, the traditions, the social constructions of gender roles that were common in his own society. He deviated from them, and that he was able to deviate from them is a clear indication that this is what God wants. And that is why St. Pope John Paul II, when he was asked about why women cannot be ordained priests, he just said, well, not in his time. And his argument was still the same. Jesus did not respect culture. If Jesus wanted a woman to be his disciple, there was nothing that was going to stop him. Nobody was going to stop him from doing that. If Jesus wanted a woman to be among the 12, definitely he was going to appoint one of those persons to be his disciples. Now, we must also understand that when you talk about the sacrifice of the Mass, the priest offers sacrifices on behalf of himself and the people. But the sacrifice of the priest does not take away sin. The sacrifice of the priest will reenact the sacrifice of Calvary. There's only one sacrifice that has been offered, and it is the one sacrifice that we all depend on, the sacrifice of Calvary. But what the sacrifice of the Mass does is that it reenacts the grace of the sacrifice of Calvary. That's why the Mass is called anamnesis. An anamnesis means an event, an action in which the grace of that action is reenacted. The grace of that action is reinvoked upon the people who perform that action. And so when people go on pilgrimages to holy sites, it's because they believe that the grace of that holy site comes upon people who go there. And so we'll talk about Jesus appointing people to work for him, or calling people to be co-sharers in his own mission. He decided to call men. And up to today, the church have not come to clear terms why he insisted strictly that it should be men. And so we as Christians, we as Catholics, last Sunday I was preaching at Mass, and I told the people, I said, personally, when I celebrated my 10th priestly anniversary, my local media came around then and asked me a very simple question. They said, Father, you have been a priest for 10 years. What is your achievement? And I said, my achievement is just act of faith. Oh my God, I believe in you and all that your church teaches because you have said it and your word is true. And I said, for the 10 years I've been a priest, I have insisted, I've tried to continue in this act of faith, that all that the church teaches and all that the Lord has revealed and all that the Lord has said, I still believe that is true. And I'm still trying to hold on to it, to depend on it, to live my life and to decide everything about my life around his own words. And so sometimes we look at every teachings of the church, we sometimes find it difficult to really accept in the strict sense of the word. But when Jesus was talking about the priesthood, and I talk about Matthew chapter 19, he said there are eunuchs who are eunuchs made by men, there are eunuchs who are naturally like that, and there are other eunuchs who are made so for the sake of the kingdom. And so at this point, he was trying to bring in the teachings of the church when it comes to priestly celibacy, where priests are called to live out this celibacy, to witness to the Lord in a special way. And this special way is that they are victims of the sacrifice they offer. And that's why one bishop once said, the greatest calamity to befall a church is to find a priest who has no sense of victimhood, is to find a priest who have no understanding of that role he is supposed to play as a victim for the people. And so when the people are in need or are dying and we are not ready to come out to say, okay, I am a victim, I'm supposed to be a source of libation to the people. I'm supposed to pour out my life, like Pontianus would say, treasures in earthen jars. We are treasures, but we are treasures because we are treasures that are meant to be poured out for the people. And so Jesus calling his disciples and sending them out to work for him. I look at St. Paul, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6, even St. Paul calling Titus chapter 1, verse 5, you still see that idea of calling just men. But it wasn't in any way an act whereby women were relegated to the background or women were looked at less important. Churches, where there were churches in the early days of the church where churches were run in women's houses. We also had situations where Jesus went to visit women and stayed with them, and they also had a prominent place. I mean, the first woman to proclaim the message of the resurrection was a woman, and the church have always recognized this, and that's why we have the religious congregation, the various religious congregation of women that are highly revered in the church, and we still have so many saints in the church. We have doctors in the church who are women, and these are clear indications that the church in any way does not see women less important in the church because they have not been ordained priests. But the church, in her own wisdom too, feels that divine revelation, which is gradual and continuous, has not gotten to that point where we have a clear understanding that God is saying women can also be ordained priests. Women can also be ministers of the sacrifice of the Mass. Till then, we will continue to believe in what the church teaches and to live out what the church teaches. summarily, I think this is what I would say, because I feel this discussion will be better when questions are asked and we go into dialogue more and more than me going into the theology and trying to sound high, like I'm in a lecture hall. I feel that's not my approach for this discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Father Ponti. So yes, as Father Ponti said, if you have any questions and if you have any doubts you want to ask, now would be a great time to ask those questions while he's here with us. And if you do want to post the questions in the chat, I'd be more than happy to ask them for you as well. If you want to privately message me, that's also fine, and I can ask them on your behalf as well. But yeah, the floor is open to anyone. If you want to just speak out loud, that's also fine. But yeah, any questions, guys?
I think my understanding, like, from zero research beforehand, was that it maybe would Jesus not have considered the fact that women at the time didn't great power in society, like as in the day-to-day women that we meet, even in households, wouldn't have had a great say in how things were run. So maybe, and because women most likely were not educated, they wouldn't be taken seriously, and it was because of that reason that he didn't choose women to lead the church, as in like to be priests. Would that not have been a possibility?
No, that wouldn't have been, because if it would have been a possibility, I don't think he would have entrusted the message of the resurrection to a woman. He wouldn't have entrusted the first message of the resurrection to a woman. That's one. And secondly, even when you think of the story of Samson, the angel first visited the woman. We think of the incarnation. The angel came to a woman. So these are all indications that God recognized the role women can play in evangelization and bringing forth the message of God. And so Jesus will have also recognized that fact and will have strictly followed that understanding, if that was what he said. But I think Jesus saw more than that, or maybe there's more to that than just in terms of gender role or social understanding, or women were not. I mean, we can see Mary Magdalene, Jesus telling him, "Go and tell my brothers that I have risen and I'm going up to Jerusalem." This is a very important message, because the whole 3 years of Jesus preaching, the heart of his message was the resurrection. And if he could entrust such a message to a woman, think about it. It meant he recognized that women can be evangelists, they can proclaim the message of Christ. But he didn't feel one should be among the 12 when he was calling the 12 the apostles.
Great. Thank you so much, Helena. Yeah. Any other questions that you'd like to ask Father Ponti about this topic? So we have a question in the chat, which is, what is the link between fatherhood and priesthood?
I think the priesthood is a medium, an agent that leads us to the Father. But the priesthood is still a father, because you don't stand, as I said at the beginning, the priest is a representative, and you represent the Father. You act in persona Christ in capitis. You act in the person of Christ, the head. So you are not acting as a person in your own capacity as a Christian. And I think some weeks back I spoke about vocation of service, the matrimony and the priesthood. And I said, if you are not a good Christian, you can't be a good priest. If you're not a good Christian, you can't be a good husband. If you're not a good Christian, you can't be a good wife. And so the priesthood does not make you a better Christian, because the priesthood is service. And so becoming a priest is a mission to serve. So how do you serve if you're not good? Marriage is a mission to service. You serve one another, and you serve the children that may come out of that, the service you have for each other. And so if you're not a good person, how will you serve? And so it is. There's a great mistake where people think that You ask very often. Back here in Nigeria, you ask people, why do you want to marry? And somebody say, I want to be responsible. I want to avoid sin. And I just laugh, and I laugh because I always say, if you are marrying to avoid sin, then you're only entering an arena of more sins, because you're going to keep your candy in the fridge, and before you come back, somebody has eaten it up. You keep money on the table, you come back, somebody has used it up. And so how will you manage that? You buy your car, after 2 weeks, it is no longer your car, it's our car. Your salary is our salary. So how wouldn't you sin in that kind of a situation? Or you say you are a priest, and then you are not ready to serve. You are in bed, 1 a.m. somebody calls you, my wife is on labor, Father, can you come and anoint her? My mother is dying, Father, can you come and anoint her or anoint him? If you're not a good Christian, you look for an excuse not to go. You look for a way of saying, oh, sorry, something came up, or this and that. So ministry of service, the sacraments of service are sacraments whereby a good Christian becomes a priest, a good Christian becomes a husband, a good Christian becomes a wife. But if you're not able to attend it, so it becomes very difficult that once you become a priest and you're not a good Christian, you're not practicing your faith well, you only get worse. You only get worse. And I'm sure most of us have seen what has happened in the church in recent times, the history, the stories of what the church has been going through in recent past. These were people who felt getting into the priesthood was a way of becoming, a lot of people who came victim of the Second World War felt becoming a priest was going to be a way of, trying to take off the trauma, the post-traumatic World War experiences. And so they came into the priesthood with a lot of trauma, with a lot of hangover of what they saw in the war, of what the suffering they saw people went through. And within a very short time, they were disenchanted. They had no understanding. They had no power of service. And so, and when you don't have the power of service, you begin to service yourself. And that's why the church has been wounded heavily. The church has been wounded greatly by a lot of these people who were not Christians in themselves and felt the priesthood could make them better Christians. The priesthood cannot make you a better Christian. The priesthood, the marriage cannot make you a better Christian. But once you are a good Christian and then you go into this, then the opportunity to serve becomes better. So the priest is like a father because you play that creative role. You bless, you give new life in baptism, you regenerate people in the sacrament of confession. You give people new birth in the service of, in the sacrament of anointing of the sick when people are at the point of death. I was yesterday on Sunday. I was giving a talk at Mass, and I said, we had Good Shepherd Sunday, and I told the people, I said, for me, my greatest achievement as a priest is that moment somebody calls you and say, Father, my mother or my brother or my sister is dying, and then you get there, you anoint the person, and then after that anointing, it looks as if the person was waiting for you. As soon as you are done anointing the person gives up, as if they were waiting for you. You begin to ask yourself, who am I that God will wait this much for me to perform this simple act that looks so simple, but so meaningful for this person, for this soul? Who am I? And so it's a privilege that very often you think about it, you just beat your breast and say, who am I? Why do I deserve this? Why should I be honored to dispense such unimaginable power or grace or blessing to humanity through my simple act and gestures and words? And so with that, you realize that the priesthood is such an enormous responsibility. It's such a great task that sometimes when you sit down and you think about it, you are just carried away. You're overwhelmed by the expectation, by the challenges, but above all, you're overwhelmed by the privilege that God has called you to share.
Father, I have a quick question if there's time.
Yeah, sure. Far away, Alvin.
Cool. I just had a question on, I don't know if this is also partially answered by your earlier answer, but it was just on the I think part of the reason why people would see that there's an inequality in women's positions in the church and men's positions might be or seeing it as a hierarchy of the church where it's priest and bishop and archbishop and all the way up. So I think so there's a point at which it's like women aren't in these positions anymore. So I just want to know your thoughts on that, or if it's a wrong way to view the church. Or I know it's like almost looking at it as like a company or something like that, but yeah, I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I will begin, like, as a sociologist. I think I'm one of those sociologists that have always argued that the concept inequality is not a concept that we should use, we should pull to a logical conclusion, because nature is, if you look at nature naturally creates things. Everything is unequal. Even our two hands, if you start to measure your two hands, you discover that one is bigger than the other. Your 2 feet, everything about us, even your brain, the size of your heart, one side is always bigger than the other. So inequality is everywhere, it's in everything. But the question we should ask is, inequality where there is victimization, inequality where there is exploitation, inequality where there is extortion, that is what we should be asking. Is the inequality in the church, is it an inequality of exploitation? Is it an inequality of marginalization? Are the women marginalized in the church? Are the women not given opportunity to share or to walk or to minister to the gospel and bring the message of Christ to other people? And so this is what we should be talking about when we talk about inequality in the church. Is it that the church have denied women opportunities of expressing themselves or being part of the decision-making body? Are women not listened to? Are women not consulted? Are women not asked to share their own views and opinions about the welfare and the well-being of the church before decisions are made? Or is it that they are never listened to, they are never consulted, they are not given an opportunity to say what they think and what they feel? So I think in the church, the word inequality does not exist, because the church is a family. And as I said at the beginning, the church has a spiritual dimension. And this spiritual dimension is the fact that we are not just trying to discuss everything democratically. We have an element of theocracy. And theocracy means we pull our understanding, we pull our teachings also from the word of God as revealed in sacred traditions and scriptures. And very often, as much as the church tries to interpret and understand the sacred tradition and scripture within an evolving world, within a changing world, she also insists that there are certain, prerequisites, there are certain ingredients that we cannot tamper with easily, because there is no clear understanding, or God has not revealed enough to us for us to be able to say, this is white, this is black, this is red, this is blue. And since if we don't have a clear-cut understanding of these things, we have to tread in those paths with caution. And I think that's what the church does when it comes to the ordination of women in the church. But the church, times without number, has always given, there are seminaries in the world where the rectors are women. There are parishes in the world where administrators are women. There are congregations in the world where they are headed by women. There are theological seminars, there are theological conferences where women are experts. Women who are experts are consulted and are invited to give in their input. So in this case, that the church does not see inequality in terms of exploitation or marginalization, or trying to sideline some group of people in the church.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Alvin. Any other questions, guys? I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to say it out loud, or if you want to post in the chat, we'd be more than happy to look into it. If not, we'd be going into a time of prayer. So yeah, any other questions you guys want to ask? And
I always believe that when there are no questions, it's a sign that everybody got what I said, and I didn't create room. And I was so precise that I didn't create room for more questions, because more question means you may have delved into issues that you didn't explain clearly. So I hope that is what it means.
I hope to, Father Ponti. But I think we don't have any more questions coming up. But yeah, that being said, or not. Okay. This is a bit off topic, but I think we can probably touch on it. Like how do a person know if they are called to priesthood or not? But it's not too relevant to this topic, but maybe slightly touch on it maybe.
Yeah, the journey of the priesthood is such a dynamic journey that two persons cannot even share their storyline and make sense for another person. If I try to talk about how my priesthood came about and another person talks, all of us, our storyline will look so unique and different as if we were called to go to different two places. At the end of it, we're arriving in the same place, the altar of the Lord. So God calls people in just unique and diverse way, just as if you read the Gospels, you see how Jesus was calling his disciples. One, he's calling by the lakeside. The other, he's calling in the tax. The other one, he's calling he's calling a person, he's delegating a person to call his brother. And then these are all indications that God calls us in diverse way. But the first thing about the priesthood is that you must have the desire. If once you begin to know the desire, the communication begins to take place. If you don't have the desire, you may never hear the voice. But once there's a desire within you, either initiated, it could be initiated by your family member, it could be initiated by your friends, it could be initiated by your own parents who may want you to go to the minor seminary or maybe just say a word to you, or a friend could jokingly tell you something. I mean, the person who initiated my priesthood 3 months ago, he was ordained a bishop, and the way he said it was a joke. We went for a conference. I was sitting in front, and he was talking about. I think I was 13 years. We went for a conference, youth conference. I was 13 years, and I was sitting in front, well dressed and looking full of life and excitement. And he was giving a talk, about the priesthood, and I was listening. And after he spoke for a while, he finished his talk, and then he just looked at me and pointed at me and said, "You think about it." And I felt he was I thought it was a joke because everybody just laughed, and nobody thought I was going to be a priest because everybody had felt, okay, I was very good in secondary school. I was coming up, and everybody felt, okay, he was going to study either medicine or something, that have to do with, the expected courses that children who are coming up and are trying to kind of give an impression like they're serious in school. Everybody want to push you towards that side. So he just looked at me and said that. And after the seminar, I said, "Father, you pointed at me and said something." I said, "Pontianus, I was only joking." That joke never left my heart.
Great.
It was a joke, but it never left me. And so every time I go to Mass and I'm trying to pray, it will cross my mind, that finger and those words. And I just said, "Lord, do you want me to be your priest?" That's how I found myself there. So that's how the Lord could communicate to us. You could just meet a friend and you say, "Think about the priesthood. You make a good priest." It sounds like a joke. You make a good reverend sister. It sounds like a joke. The person could laugh over it. But if it is divinely inspired, if it is coming from the Lord, those words will leave the person's heart. And that is all. The fire has been rekindled. All the person needs is to fan into flame that fire. And the flame keeps growing. The flame keeps growing. You get to a point in your life, you feel as if you are not a priest, your life is meaningless. You feel as if that's just what you want to be. All arguments we've made around you, people tell you things, priests are bad, priests are this, priests are that. But deep down in you, you can't just quench that fire. And so one can only become a priest, first of all, just the desire. You can also, those of us who believe and we have friends who we feel are responsible, are decent, are good, are God-fearing, are dedicated to prayer. You would just say jokingly, simply, you make a good priest. And the person laugh over it. But if it is truly the will of God and the calling from the Lord, those words will stay.